Hey, everybody, and welcome once again to Nose in the Book Bible Reading Commentary with me, your host, Pastor Justin Van Reed. So great to be with you for the next few minutes as we take a look at four more chapters from the Word of God. We have before us today in our readings from 1 Chronicles chapter 22, from 1 Peter, we're in chapter 3, from Micah, we're in chapter 1, and in Luke, Gospel of Luke, we're in chapter 10. So if you have any questions or comments about these readings, please feel free to post those in the comments section below. Otherwise, let's take a look at what we've got. All right, First Chronicles chapter 22 is where we start here. And this is getting towards the end of David's reign now. And you can see how Chronicles doesn't really have a lot of details about David's reign. We've basically talked about military victories. We've talked about his, key people and in his, his cabinet leading his army. And we talked about the census in the last chapter, but here you have the preparations for the temple. So something that's left out of Samuel, 1st, 2nd Samuel, but is included here is that David had a significant role in the building of the temple. I know we think of Solomon because Solomon's the one who actually had the temple constructed, but here we read that basically David played a pivotal role in bringing together key people and key items to prepare for the building of the temple when the time came. And God had clearly told David that he would not build him a temple, but that Solomon would. So here's what we read here. David gives orders, it says, to call together foreigners living in Israel and assigns them the task of preparing finished stone for building the temple. So he provides large amounts of iron for the nails and bronze and cedar logs, and so he all the raw material, it says. And then David said, since Solomon is still young and inexperienced and the temple to be built must be a magnificent structure, I will begin making preparations for it now. It says, so David collected vast amounts of building materials before his death. Then he sends Solomon and instructs him build a temple for the Lord. And so Solomon does, but it's because God had said to David, the Lord said to me, as he says here, you have killed many men in battles you have fought, since you have shed so much blood. You will not be the one to build a temple, but you will have a son. He'll be a man of peace. His name will be Solomon. I'll give peace and quiet to Israel during his reign, and so he'll build a temple to honor my name. And so now David charges Solomon here, may the Lord be with you, give you success as you follow his directions in building the temple of the Lord your God, and may the Lord give you wisdom and understanding that you may obey the law your God as the Lord your God as you rule over Israel. For you'll be successful if you carefully obey the decrees and regulations. Now we do read that in the beginning of 1 Kings when David's close to death. He charges Solomon with very similar thing, right? Be strong and courageous, follow the law. If you follow what the Lord said in his word, then you will have success. But he also tells Solomon here, look, here's all the provisions that I've put together, 4,000 tons of gold, 40,000 tons of silver, iron and bronze, even too many tons that you can't weigh it, timber, stone. He's got skilled stonemasons available, carpenters, craftsmen, goldsmiths, silversmiths, workers of bronze and iron. So David had brought all of this together, and then is going to have Solomon, everything set up for Solomon when he takes over. But again, his teaching is, now seek the Lord your God with all your heart and soul. Or build the temple, but seek the Lord and obey him throughout your life. All right, we go then to 1 Peter and chapter 3 here. And at the end of chapter 2, remember that Peter, like Paul does in several of his books, where he had instructions for the slaves and how they should behave to their masters and treat their masters and work hard. So here, likewise, you also have for wives and husbands and then for everyone. So, he talks about wives accepting the authority of their husbands, and how, in this case, he points out a little bit different from what Paul writes, that if you have an unbelieving husband, that they could be won over through your godliness. So he says, if some refuse to obey the good news, your godly lives will speak to them without any words, and they will be won over by observing your pure and reverent lives. Also instructs the women not to be concerned with outward beauty, but with inward beauty, right? This is how the holy women of old made themselves beautiful. They put their trust in God and accept the authority of their husbands. Husbands, though, he calls to give honor to your wives. Treat them with understanding as you live together. He says that she is your equal partner in God's gift of new life. So treat her as you should, so your prayers will not be hindered. And then He tells everyone, be of one mind, unity, sympathize with each other, love each other as brothers and sisters, be tenderhearted, don't repay evil for evil. So, going on here about, as we saw, earlier in First Peter, the life of holiness, what it looks like to live a holy life. And he's getting very specific here in different areas of life, different relationships, and then just in general. But also, he mentions here how, we're going to suffer, but we ought to be committed to doing right, even if it means suffering, right? It's the fact that a choice or decision is going to lead to suffering doesn't mean that we should change the decision. But he says, but, we shouldn't suffer for doing wrong, right? That's what, if we do wrong, we deserve to suffer. But he says, but suffer, for doing good. He says, if someone asks about your hope as a believer, always be ready to explain it. Do it in a gentle and respectful way. And he says, if people speak against you, they'll be ashamed when they see what a good life you live because you belong to Christ. Remember, it's better to suffer for doing good than to suffer for doing wrong. And talks about how Christ likewise suffered. And so again, he's the example. A holy living. We're following the Holy One. We're being like the Lord and doing what he would do. All right, then we go back to the Old Testament, still in the prophets here. A new prophet, though, Micah. So we finished the book of Jonah, which is unique in the prophets in that all of Jonah is a narrative. Mostly what we're used to in the prophets are these texts that are more technically poetic in nature, even though they're prophetic in the terms of the genre and the language that they use. The actual nature of the text is written in poetry, so often you'll see it offset, and that's what that tells us, that originally this was Hebrew poetry here. So this is Micah of Moresheth, and he lived during the reigns of Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah, kings of Judah, and he sees visions concerning both Samaria and Jerusalem, or in other words, the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom during the divided kingdom period. And like the other prophets, what does he talk about here? The Lord's coming, and he's going to be coming in judgment because of their sin. So he says, this fearful vision that he has, and why? Verse 5, because of the rebellion of Israel, the sins of the whole nation. And he says, who's to blame? Samaria, Jerusalem, the capitals. All right, so I, the Lord, he says, will make the city of Samaria a heap of ruins, and this judgment that's coming on them. Talks here about people of Judah also. Shave your heads in sorrow, for the children you love will be snatched away. So judgment coming on both the northern kingdom, Israel, and the southern kingdom of Judah, and again because of their sin. And how that this is just all the Lord's judgment coming. He says, verse 12, even to the gates of Jerusalem. All right, lastly, we go to the Gospel of Luke in Luke chapter 10 here. And here, beginning of the chapter talks about this time in Jesus' ministry when he sent out 72 disciples in pairs to go basically ahead of him and to instruct. He tells them, the harvest is great, the workers are few. So go, I'm sending you out as lambs among wolves, right? Don't take any money, extra pair of sandals, don't greet anyone. Very focused on the mission here, right? Just don't move around from home to home. Stay in one place. Don't hesitate to accept hospitality. It says, if you enter a town and it welcomes you, eat whatever's set before you, heal the sick, tell them the kingdom of God is near you now. But if they refuse, then move on. And then he, says that there's going to be cities in Israel that are going to face judgment because of their rejection of the good news of salvation in Jesus Christ. So he says again, anyone who accepts your message is accepting me, Jesus says, and anyone who rejects you is rejecting me and rejecting God, the Father, who sent Jesus. And so they go out, they return, and it says they joyfully reported to him, Lord, even the demons obey us when we use your name. And Jesus says, yeah, I've given you authority over the power of the enemy. Nothing will injure you, but don't rejoice because of these miraculous things. Rejoice because your name's registered in heaven, because you have salvation. And then, he prays to the Father here. And then, we get on to the parable of the Good Samaritan, takes up a chunk here, famous parable. But I want to take the last minute here and the end of the chapter. I just love this paragraph when Jesus goes to visit his friends Mary and Martha. And of course, Martha is there and she's all busy. As it says in the New Living, she was distracted by the big dinner she was preparing. But it says that meanwhile, Mary sat at the Lord's feet. And when Martha says, Lord, doesn't it seem unfair to you? Mary's just sitting here. I'm doing all this work. And Jesus, so compassionate and yet so pointed. My dear Martha, you're worried and upset over all these details. There's only one thing worth being concerned about. Mary has discovered it sitting at Jesus' feet, and it will not be taken away from her. How important that we don't get caught up in all of the busyness of life and all the things we have to do, and we miss out on the number one thing, keeping our eyes on the Lord and our nose in the book, spending time with Jesus, walking with him, sitting at his feet. That's all we have time for today. Again, we have 1 Chronicles 22, 1 Peter 3, Micah 1, and Luke chapter 10. I hope you have a good day today. Until next time, keep your eyes on the Lord and your nose in the book. Sit at Jesus' feet today. We'll see you again soon.